horrors of war. A city burned to the ground. Thousands of men who never get to go home. And in the middle of all of it, the one man who made every bit of that possible. The man without whom Troy never falls at all. You'd assume a man like that got something out of it. Every other hero at Troy did. Achilles wanted his name to outlive him. Agamemnon wanted an empire. Menelaus wanted his wife back. So what did the man who actually won them the war walked away with? Nothing. Not glory. Not riches. Not even his own name attached to most of what he did. The single thing Odysseus wanted, the only thing he actually came here for, was the one thing 10 years of being brilliant never bought him. Because before any of this started, before he was the reason Troy fell, Odysseus tried everything he could think of to never show up here at all, and even that failed. By now, Odysseus had a son, Telemachus, barely old enough to lift his own head, let alone understand that his father was about to disappear for a decade, maybe forever. Odysseus was not going to leave that boy without a fight. So he does the only thing he can think of, pretends to be insane. No arguing, no bribery, no negotiating with Agamemnon's men. Just play the madman and hope no one wants a broken mind on a battlefield. But how do you actually prove a man is faking madness? You can't ask him. A liar just lies again. You can't reason with him. A madman doesn't reason. There's no test for this. No question that gets you a truthful answer. Unless you don't ask a question at all. Palamedes said nothing. He lifted the infant Telemachus out of his mother's arms and placed him directly in the plow's path. No interrogation, no argument. Just one impossible choice, forced on a man who thought he'd already found a way out. Odysseus swerved. He just lost to a man who thought exactly like him. He wouldn't forget it. But the war didn't need Odysseus caught. It needed him to be useful. Agamemnon didn't punish him for the attempt. He used it as proof of exactly what Odysseus was good for, and handed him his first real assignment. Find the warrior who was hiding exactly the way Odysseus just had. Troy couldn't fall without one man. His own mother knew exactly what would happen if he ever set foot on that battlefield, and she tried to make sure it never would. A goddess had hidden her son so thoroughly that even a prophet needed the god's help to sense where he was. Odysseus arrived on Skyros with a location and nothing else. One island, an entire court of daughters, and no way to simply ask which one was actually a warrior in disguise. Odysseus doesn't search for a boy. He tests for one. Disguised as a merchant, he lays out gifts for the king's daughters, jewelry, fine cloth. Amongst the gifts, he also planted a sword in the mix. Every real daughter reaches for the jewelry. One reaches for the blade first. Odysseus had just found the one thing a goddess spent years trying to hide, and used it to hand a boy his own death sentence, dressed up as glory. It was one thing to use that mind for the war. It was another to realize what else it could do. And there was still a debt outstanding, from the one man who'd ever beaten him at his own game. Everyone at Troy still remembered the man who exposed Odysseus back on Ithaca. The one man clever enough to catch him. Palamedes hadn't just survived that encounter. He was respected for it. Odysseus had never forgiven him. A grudge that old against a man that well regarded in the middle of a war neither of them started. How do you destroy someone the entire army trusts without ever laying a hand on him? You don't attack the man head on. You simply attack what everyone believes about him. A letter appeared, forged, made to look like it came from inside Troy, addressed to Palamedes, thanking him for information sold in secret. Gold turned up buried beneath his tent, planted there the night before. It was discovered. No trial, no real evidence, just enough trigger for Odysseus to sell a story. A story simple enough for an already exhausted army to believe. Palamedes was stoned to death by his own men, the same soldiers who'd once respected him for outsmarting the cleverest man in Greece. Nobody ordered Odysseus to do this. There was no war being won here. Just a debt, now settled in full, using nothing but a lie. Everything he'd done up to now had at least served the war. This didn't serve anyone but himself. He'd just proven the terrifying ease with which he could have a man killed. Soon, that same mind would be asked to do something far harder, save a friend from himself. And for the first time in this story, it wouldn't be enough. Achilles was still refusing to fight. Agamemnon had insulted him, and the greatest warrior alive had pulled out of the war entirely, taking his soldiers with him. Without him, Troy's walls weren't moving. Men were dying every day he stayed in his tent. Odysseus had talked a goddess's hidden son into a war he'd die in. He'd talked an entire army into executing an innocent man over a forged letter. So surely, out of everyone at Troy, he could talk one furious friend back into a war he'd already half decided to return to anyway. He offered everything. Agamemnon's apology, dressed up in Odysseus's own words. Gifts, riches, position, honor, all of it, laid out with the same skill that had worked on everyone else in this story. Achilles listened to every word. Achilles didn't just refuse the offer. He called out exactly what Odysseus was doing while he did it, told him to his face that he hated a man who says one thing and hides another behind it, as much as he hated death itself. For the first time, the trick didn't work. Days later, Patroclus put on Achilles' armor and rode out in his place. He never came back. The one time Odysseus' gift failed, it wasn't Odysseus who paid for it. Achilles returned to the war anyway, not for Agamemnon, not for glory, but for revenge. He got it. Hector died, and not long after, so did he. 10 years in, and the war still wasn't over. It would take one final trick, the last one Odysseus had left, to end what strength alone never could. 10 years. Every direct assault had failed. Every hero on both sides who could die in single combat already had. Troy's walls hadn't moved an inch since the war began. Then one morning, the Greek ships were gone. The camp, empty. 10 years of siege. And Troy woke up to find the war simply over. Except for one thing left behind on the shore. Something enormous, something the Greeks had clearly spent real effort building, right before they supposedly gave up and sailed home. Troy had just survived a decade of the most disciplined, cautious defense in the ancient world. So why would a city that careful drags a strange object built by their enemy through their own gates? Because it didn't look like a weapon. It looked like surrender. A wooden horse, tall enough to loom over the walls, inscribed as an offering to the gods. The kind of thing you leave behind when you're begging for safe passage home, not preparing an attack. Troy didn't see a trap. They saw 10 years of war, finally, actually ending. They pulled it through their own gates as a trophy, and celebrated long into the night. At the darkest hour, while the city slept off its own victory, Odysseus gave the signal from inside the horse's belly. A handful of hidden soldiers dropped out and opened the gates from within. Troy fell before sunrise, not to strength, not to 10 years of war, but to one final lie, dressed up as a peace offering. Achilles got his glory. Agamemnon got his conquest. Menelaus got his wife back. Look closer, and the same man is standing behind every single one of those outcomes. A father forced to swerve, a boy forced to reach for a sword, an army forced to believe a lie, a city forced to open its own gates. Different men, different choices, but always the same architect, and never once his own choice being the one that got built. He never had to win an argument. He just had to build the circumstance where no one had any choice left but the one he wanted. He'd spent 10 years doing that for every man at Troy, not once for himself. His war, the one that actually cost him everything, was just getting started. If you want the full story, his whole journey home, that video's linked right here.